I would like to give a little bit of an overview about what has been so far in regards to your career. Sure. I want to clarify for all the attendees and also for all the viewers of this discussion we will hold together that we invited you here as an expert on press freedom matters.
Thank you.
Also as a foreign correspondent with your experience coming from Argentina, having worked as a foreign correspondent for many years here in the United States. Although your current role, for those who read your bio, is that you are the program manager at the Open Society Foundation journalism field. And also you have a great experience since 2002 until 2017, working for the committee and with the Committee to Protect Journalists. And as I said before, you are the real person who has complete and substantial expertise on press freedom matters. So I would like to initiate this conversation today with you, Carlos, and thank you for taking the time to be with us. And it is really a pleasure and an honor to have you here with us today. What do you think it is I would like to have an overview about what do you think it is the current state in regards to the respect that local governments, particular interests, and the society in a broader sense are showing to journalists in regards to press freedom matters. Do you think that we're in a better state compared to a few years ago, a few decades ago?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you, Thanos, and Foreign Press Center for this opportunity, and to greet all the people that are joining us at this time to discuss an issue that I think is vital for democracy. Is one of the pillars of democracy. The press freedom and the independent press, and the work of the independent press in terms of allowing citizens to be informed, to express their opinions, ideas, without fear of interference or reprisal. In terms of the state of press freedom around the world, I think we're going through a very obscure and dark period, Thanos. There are, several problems affecting the state of the press. But the reality is that global press freedom is now in steep decline. There's mounting conflicts around the world. There's the sway of large criminal networks and the impact it has on the work of the press. Then you have, on the other side, you were talking about governments and the relationship with journalists. You have the rise in many parts of the world of populists, and authoritarianism is clearly rising globally. And then on top of that, you have the backsliding of Western democracies in the United States and across Europe. Former allies, right, of press freedom causes and press freedom issues that are now setting extremely low standards. All of these elements put together provide a very dark portrait of the state of press freedom around the world. You have, in the last 5 years, murders, killings of journalists and bloggers, including highly publicized executions at the hand of terrorist groups, for example. You have vicious crimes, the Khashoggi murder, for example, that caused an outcry around the world. Incredible that you can have a journalist, a prominent columnist for the Washington Post, being massacred in a foreign consulate, in a consulate of Saudi Arabia and Turkey. You have bombings targeting media in different parts of the world. This shows that, you know, the globe, the planet has become a very dangerous place for the press. The past decade or so has been perhaps the most deadly in terms of number of journalists killed around the world, according to the statistics by leading press freedom organizations. And the problem is that aggravates the situation of murder, is that impunity is the norm in many of the investigations into these cases. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, Reporters Without Borders, that you know, they have a rigorous and count of the number of journalists killed, as well as the number of journalists in prison for their work. There is an average of 2 journalists killed every week in the past decade. And 9 out of 10 cases, those responsible for killing these journalists, both masterminds and the physical authors of the crimes, they go free. They are not punished. You know, in many of the places, in many of the countries where journalists are killed with impunity, judiciaries are both overburdened and dysfunctional, and they fail to provide justice. And so there's no accountability for those responsible for killing journalists. So impunity, as pervasive as it is, generates a situation that, you know, where you know, the perpetrators of these crimes, you know, have a kind of a green light to continue to engage in this kind of behavior, criminal behavior. And, you know, journalists and the media are paying a high price for that.
And you mentioned, which is the most serious aspect of the violation against press freedom, and you mentioned, of course, the several killings of tens of numerous journalists and a lot of professionals in journalism during the last decade who have been killed while they were executing their reporting. And most people, I think that they conceive the idea of press freedom having as examples of violation of press freedom the highest level of atrocities, which is the killing of journalists. But what about the other aspects that journalists are facing? They may not be killed, they may not be murdered, but there are journalists across the globe in different countries who are facing other ways of attempts to which try to put them down, to turn them down, to intimidate them, to, you know, to blackmail them, to manipulate them. Do you think that these cases are also under the umbrella of the cases that we are experiencing in terms of the violation of press freedom principles?
Yes, of course, and thanks for the question. It's a very good point, Thanos. I think that besides deadly violence, besides the killings, hundreds of journalists are being attacked, threatened, or harassed each year. Many are persecuted and hunted down. They're even surveilled. You know, surveillance is being used by states, by governments in many countries to intercept the calls of journalists, to intercept communications, emails. No, online communications are hacked, and there's a question of the imprisonment of journalists, which is the other main indicator that gives you a picture, a portrait, a general portrait of the state of the press around the world. One is the number of journalists killed. The other one is the number of journalists imprisoned for the work. And at this time, there are more than 200 journalists imprisoned for their work around the world. Many of them being accused of anti-state activities. Many also under vague anti-terrorism laws or spurious tax evasion or money laundering accusations. CPJ, RSF, Article 19, International Press Institute, organizations that promote and protect the rights of journalists, count, more than hundreds of cases of journalists being detained, being harassed, being threatened. So this is a real problem because it's not only creating the case of journalists having to defend themselves, put lawyers, pay for lawyers, but it's also creating a chilling effect for those who are still working and are doing it, knowing that that they have this Damocles sword in front of them, knowing that what they write, what they air, what they broadcast may be liable, they may be sued, and they may end up in jail. That creates a serious chilling effect. And the problem is that in many cases, because of the deadly violence, because of the threat of imprisonment or of legal action, many of the issues that affect the daily lives of people around the world are not being reported. Press freedom violations, murders, imprisonment, legal action, harassment, intimidation, the threat of being accused of tax evasion or money laundering, forces journalists and media to devote time to defend themselves instead of doing their work. And in terms of the chilling effect, it doesn't allow journalists, it doesn't allow the press to cover very important issues that affect the daily lives of people, citizens, many citizens around the world. This is not only affecting the sector, it's not only affecting the media, the journalists, it's clearly having an impact on the citizens' rights to be informed. And the citizens are not being informed, there's an information vacuum, which is bad for democracy because it doesn't allow the possibility to engage in a discussion about issues that affect the lives of people. But I think it also is bad for democracy because the inability of people to exercise the right to freedom of expression and the inhibition that this imposes in the public debate, it makes it more difficult for policymakers to be able to to put out public policies, right? Because
exactly, yeah.
They are being informed by the media, by journalists. So it's clearly not healthy for democracy itself.
So from my understanding, I think that you would certainly agree with the aspect and the view of the fact that the level of press freedom in each country is parallel to the level of democracy and democratic values that dominate the country, the public sector, the public system, and the public policies of its government in its different country. and also to the level of the independence of the media. Because when we talk about press freedom, and I would like to have your view on that, how relevant is the aspect of the level of press freedom for the media, of the independence of the media organizations themselves, not just about the journalists, because most of the times we're talking about the journalists, but I think that we forget that these people, these professionals in journalism, are working for media organizations. And even if journalists are really brave to do their reporting and to go to the end to pursue their belief about the story that they want to report, if they don't have a media organization that is independent and is, playing a fair game and is not having any level of manipulation from the government, then, the journalist itself can certainly send a strong message to the society, but he or she needs also the backup of the media organization that he or she works. Absolutely. How do you feel about this?
Absolutely, absolutely. No, the independent media, the ability of the media to be able to report independently is critical for press freedom. There's no question about it, and that's why you see today the proliferation of oligarchs who are, have close ties to governments in different countries, acquiring media. They know the power. They know the power of independent media, and in terms of trying to interfere or to try to curtail the power of independent media, independent reporting, you see today the proliferation of what is called media capture, right? By oligarchs, by people close to government, by people that are tied to politicians in many different countries around the world.
Or in Greece, I can give you the example of the government paying state-owned money through ads to the media, so that way the media are not fully independent because they expect to have this income.
The manipulation of official advertising is a tactic that is employed everywhere. And, as you very clearly established in your statement right now, it's used, as a way in many countries also to, by officials, to for media to support policies, official policies, and in other cases it's used as a system where those who receive official advertising are rewarded, right, with official advertising, and the media that remain critical and do not support the government policies are, that official advertising is withdrawn. So it's a system of rewards and punishments used commonly by governments as a way to manipulate coverage and to obviously have an influence in the coverage.
Before I put in our conversation some of our guests here, I can see here, of course, our chairwoman, Nancy Prager-Kamel. I see Frank Smith from Washington, D.C., Bill Miller. They will join us in a few minutes, among other people who are here attending. I would like to ask a little bit more personal question. What makes you get involved in the press freedom field? I know that every journalist is very sensitive about the topics of press freedom because it is very closely related to your daily work. But you are one of the highest top experts, I could say, in a global field because you have accumulated a very significant experience. So we can certainly call you a real expert. What makes you get involved more deeper in this field of press freedom? And also, going back to the beginning of your career, when you were a journalist in Argentina, or when you moved here to the US as a foreign correspondent, can you bring up 1 or 2 examples that you recall that you faced this, let's say, threat, let's say, tactics of trying to be manipulated by someone or some special interest? Sure. Anything that you can recall, and that we can use it as an example of getting a real sense about what we are talking.
Right. Thank you, Thanos, and thank you for your description. The word expert, I mean, I feel a little.
There are many people who call themselves experts, but you are the real expert.
I will call myself an advocate. I mean, I am a journalist because I was born a journalist in Argentina. I worked there for regional newspapers, starting my career. In fact, I started my career in one of the national papers covering sports, and then I moved to a regional paper where I did almost everything there. And then soon thereafter, I started working for a magazine publishing company, and I had the opportunity to come to the US to work as a foreign correspondent for the largest magazine publishing company in Argentina, Editorial Perfil. And then, the great opportunity to work for the Committee to Protect Journalists for CPJ, probably the best job I ever had. And, really...
and for many years, 2002,
yes,
2007.
Yes. I work with CPJ, and I'm seeing Frank, my friend.
You know each other.
Yeah,
of course,
a very close friend. I work together with him. I have a lot of admiration and respect for his work, and his,
That's true.
He's a close.
Hello, Frank.
Yeah.
Hi guys, nice to be here.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Carlos. You're looking good, buddy.
Good to see you, Frank.
Thank you, man.
You too. My first close encounter with press freedom came when I was a correspondent, Thanos, and it was quite an experience, I was working as a correspondent for the news magazine Noticias, which is the largest news magazine of Editorial Perfil, one of the largest news magazines in South America in Spanish language. It was in 1997, early 1997. I received a call from the editor early morning on a Sunday. So foreign correspondents have no weekend, so it was not strange. But his tone sounded really serious when I took the call, and he told me that a photographer for Noticias, José Luis Cabezas, had been brutally murdered in Argentina. It was not in Buenos Aires; it was in the beach resort of Pinamar, which is around 400 kilometers outside Buenos Aires. Cabezas was a features photographer, basically, who used to cover the summer season in Pinamar. And there, one of the most obscure business moguls used to spend the summer with his family, José Luis Abrán. And he was the one who Noticias followed for several years, looking at his business dealings, in many areas, many strategic areas of Argentina and the state, close to state businesses. So he told me Cabezas was kidnapped after covering an event. He was taken to a place outside, an isolated place outside this beach resort. He was shot in his head and burnt in his car. It was probably one of the most brutal murders of a journalist in Argentina after the restoration of democracy in 1983. And what did Cabezas, what was he doing? He basically covered the summer in this location and was one of the few people, probably the only photographer that was able to capture this businessman and, have photos of him. And he was, the center of several investigations by Noticias about his obscure dealings in Argentina. And, Cabezas was a photographer. So it created, this murder was shocking for Argentina. It created waves of, protests, rallies in the streets, marches. It was, the government at that time, the Menem administration couldn't, at the beginning they said, well, this is not a political murder, this is nothing to do with his journalism, but they couldn't get away with it in terms of trying to deviate the conversation or the focus on the case. So the public outcry that it created forced the judiciary to look seriously into the matter. And it was soon, after a few months, it was soon discovered that there was a former policeman that were involved in the crime. And, soon thereafter, it was revealed that the head of security for this obscure businessman was leading the group of people that kidnapped Cabezas and killed him, burned him in his car. So, when I received a call from the editor of Noticias, he said, well, we need to just call on civil society, international organizations, mobilize international organizations, because the government is not putting everything on top of this case. So, that was when I first visited CPJ. And, I said it would be important for us to be able to reach out to speak with a prominent member of your board of directors, comprised by some of the top journalists in the US and also some international journalists, a few. So, they said, well, the chairman of the board of directors at that time was Katharine Graham, who was the owner of the Washington Post. And I reached out to the Washington Post and then said that this horrible crime was affecting, a photographer for the magazine I worked for as a correspondent in the US, and that I really wanted to see if I can interview Katharine Graham for a story in Noticias about the crime. And, soon thereafter, they called me from the Washington Post and they let me know that, Mrs. Graham will receive me in her house in Georgetown, Washington. And it was one of the best interviews I ever did, incredible character, very well depicted in the movie The Post. So I think that was really a very close encounter. I think that, just to tell you how the story developed, I mean, this businessman, 8 months after the crime a year after the crime, was called to testify because, his head of security was already in jail. He disappeared and a few days after he disappeared was found dead, apparently committed suicide after shooting himself in the mouth. So, I mean, the power of civil society behind the the public outcry and everything that, that the organizations did to bring up, the importance of justice in case of a very prominent journalist who was killed, and really had a big impact in later in my career as a journalist and as a press freedom advocate.
One very quick question: what do you think from your meeting and interview with the owner of Washington Post, Graham? One or two pieces of your memory we would like to have.
Sure. I was struck by she was a very candid person, very honest, very frank. She was horrified when I described what had happened, and all her experience, and being the chairman of such an organization. It was a very powerful, and I think it had for the press in Argentina, that interview had a very a strong impact, I think, because of the weight that she obviously carried for journalism around the world. No? So I was honestly, it was a great experience to be able to interview her and to meet her in person.
Frank, we would like to have you on stage asking a question, doing a comment. We want your contribution here, as you are also an expert.
Thank you, Thanos. So, Carlos, since we were at CPJ, things have changed, right? And not for the better, right? And I'm concerned about the effect of Trump, right? I don't think the United States is any more a beacon on press freedom to the degree that it ever was, right? But now it's really dimmed. And the United States, its whole role in the world is diminished, right? In terms of the rest of the world, right? The notion of, is the U.S. a reliable ally? Nobody can answer that because Trump could be coming back, right? And we're seeing he's emerged even after January 6th to have more power than we thought. At the same time, Russia and China are both expanding their strategic interests and their territorial reach and cutting through press freedom concerns, right? And human rights concerns with the Uyghurs in China, right? Putin in terms of his own dissidents and also in the Ukraine and occupied areas. So I think it's, we didn't expect this 15 years ago, right? Even 10 years ago, this kind of turn. So what would it take? Is there a strategic vision for the press freedom community to try and get traction in what seems like a post-American-led world, a world where the United States is still the greatest power, but is no longer the leader that it once was, right? And I'm wondering if you guys have thought about that vis-a-vis the European Union and other nations, right? How the press freedom and human rights community can get traction in this environment, because I'm a little worried about it.
Yeah, I think it's a very important question, Frank. I think as you describe it, the backsliding of Western democracies, has left a vacuum, right? I think that the U.S. was backsliding on press freedom probably way before Trump came to power, right? And I remember working with you, Frank, and all the questions about what happened after 9/11 and the lack of access and the lack of transparency, and what came after, the Bush years with the prosecutions of whistleblowers during Obama, which had a record of, leaked prosecutions. But clearly, Trump was, a different chapter. And I think that as you described well, the consequence of Trump, I think one of the worst consequences, I think, is the emboldenment that he provided for autocrats around the world, so that, the Washington Post columnist is dismembered in Turkey in the consulate of Saudi Arabia, and with evidence after a formidable report by Agnes Calamar in the UN that there was involvement from the crown prince in the crime, he got a pass, basically, right? So I think there is a sense in the press freedom community that this is an era where the allies or former allies of the press freedom causes are not, what they used to be. That realization, has obviously changed a lot of things, even in terms of, the way that leverage is being thought, because at some point, and you may remember, the U.S., even with its problems, was, a place where, Congress and officials, can be used as leverage to, and so was the European Union.
Yeah.
This is no longer the case. So, it's a challenge that we are all trying to grapple with.
Nancy, we have our chairwoman, Nancy Prager-Kamel here. Frank, you stay here, you don't go. We stay because we want to have you following up with what we discuss here. Before I give the stage to Nancy, I would like to make a comment. If you agree with my perception here, do you think that what is missing right now is something like a more global alliance between different organizations that they work on the press freedom matters in a global stage? Because Frank just mentioned about, for example, the EU stance. As a European, I don't think and I don't see the EU taking bold steps on ensuring that press freedom is, equally protected to different member states. But do you think that having all the organizations that report about press freedom matters and problems across the globe, if all of them get together, may get their voice stronger and probably the impact of their actions more efficient and more effective?
I think that, the US now has an opportunity to regain some of the lost ground during Trump, no? Unfortunately, the Biden administration, despite the, back to the Khashoggi case, despite the evidence of involvement by the Crown Prince, did not impose sanction on him, no? So that's kind of a step backward, but what I think besides what governments can do, I would like to just to focus a little bit on what journalists and media are doing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that it is important. While governments needs to do much more, and I agree, now there's an opportunity, and the US needs to build alliances and work with the European Union to highlight these with countries that really are supportive of these policies. I think that the journalists themselves need to find for more creative ways in order to highlight and to come together, no? To highlight some of the problems that they are facing. I think that there's a need for this to happen. And you can see that there are some examples around the world that you know, are not only innovative ways of doing it, but they are creating some impact. I mean, for example, the case of Daphne Caruana Galizia, a Maltese journalist that you may remember, Thanos, was killed, bombed in her car a few years ago. She was, you know, doing investigations on corruption in Malta for several years, and she was brutally murdered, bombed out. A group of journalists, of investigative reporters in collaboration around the world, you know, in the US, in Europe, in different parts, produced an investigative report. No? The group is called the Forbidden Stories, and they are aiming to look into cases of journalists who have been murdered, imprisoned, or silenced, or censored, in order to give voice or to you know, bring light to the stories that these journalists, you know, killed or imprisoned were reporting. I mean, the Daphne report, you know, shed light on who were the people who committed the crime, what was Daphne Caruana Galicia's reporting and investigating before she was killed, and you know, caused, you know, an outcry, and you know, as a result of that, and you know, the public pressure that you know, that this, you know, joint report brought, you know, prosecutions and arrests and resignations at the top level of the Maltese government. I think that, you know, these are examples of, you know, of things that journalists are taking on themselves as, you know, dysfunctionality, as I described before, and impunity, dysfunctionality of judiciaries over systems that are overburdened and cannot provide justice. So I think it is important for journalists to come together, foreign correspondents with local journalists. You know, there are places around the world where journalists are killed, and you know, the local people are not able to report on what happened to their colleagues because, you know, they are terrorized. And so this coming together, this collaboration of foreign correspondents with local journalists is important. You know, there's another investigation that was recently put forward by this same group about the murder of a Mexican journalist in the state of Veracruz, probably the most murderous state in one of the countries where more journalists have been killed in the past decade, which is Mexico, no? And the you know, the collaboration between local, international journalists highlighting the work of Regina Martinez, which is this correspondent of one of the main news magazine in Mexico, Proceso, what she was investigating, reporting. And, you know, this, I think, it's an important point. Journalists reacting, getting together, kind of elevating the cost of killing journalists by reporting on what their colleagues were working on, and highlighting the issue, because it puts pressure on authorities to do more, to investigate, and not to stay quiet. So I think this is an important aspect of things that trying to answer your and Frank's question, when there's, so many difficulties around the world, and when the governments that were supporting Presidium are not longer supporting these causes, or because of different factors, I think this is an important aspect to focus on.
Nancy, we don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay. Well, as usual, you preempted my question, Thanos. We think alike, but thank you, Carlos. It's unfortunately, very relevant and timely, the subject matter, and we appreciate your expertise. As way of credentials, I'm the chairman of the Association of Foreign Correspondents, but served on a lifetime at the UN on human rights issues and involvements in organizations, including UNESCO. And I mention UNESCO because they do have a specific arm that could be, I think, more highly activated. But my question, and I guess my thought would be, we know that there has to be scaffolding around the journalist, and there has to be an accountability. And these are the two elements that you've discussed in great detail and very correctly. How do we bring it to a stage that it can take the position and have the protection that it so desperately needs? You've got the ICC, you've got the International Court, how do we tap into these? And I think as a first step, if you had unanimity, both internationally and across the board with active journalists, there could be a momentum that's built. Human Rights Watch does one thing, it shines a light, it tells a story. But between telling the story and activating a scaffolding or a responsible protection, we have to be able to envision what that looks like and then make it happen. What would you suggest?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Nancy. I think that's a very good question, and it's a question that obviously I don't have the answer to. I have ideas based on my work in the past, and I'm dealing with these issues very closely, and looking at pervasive impunity in cases of killed journalists in Mexico, and I think that one idea, that you frame in your question is, intergovernmental mechanisms and what can they bring in terms of when a case has exhausted internal remedies, the possibility of bringing these cases to for example, in Latin America and in the Americas, the Inter-American system, and what can the Inter-American system do in terms of, not only, providing redress to families of victims, but also, that finally, the issue of accountability. I think those mechanisms can be, at least, something that are very useful, and I think that you from the Khashoggi case, I think that's an example. I think that while justice is something that doesn't look at this time likely in the Khashoggi case, I think that the report by Agnes Calamard I think was essential to be able to, look into those who, committed the crime and those who masterminded the crime. So I think that, in the absence of states being able to serve justice, I think that international mechanisms, independent investigations can be, can be a way through this problem.
Right. Thank you. But just build a little bit more on that, because I think, as I said, we're problem solvers. So we're looking to maybe have a forum where you've got the major stakeholders who can have various aspects of protection that they offer. Can we bring them together? Can we have some kind of entity that can be a scaffolding around what you're trying to do? Bring in UNESCO, the organizations that have this as a core value and a core issue. Can we bring together a forum and look for solutions so that the numbers, as horrible as they are, in a world scale might not be that compelling, but the voice, every time you silence the voice of a journalist, you are silencing information for a broad swath of communities. Mm-hmm. And, it's exponentially very important.
I think that's a very good idea, Nancy. Yeah, I think bringing together, the different stakeholders that are looking into this. It could be, a starting point to look for, solutions and ways out of this problem. I think so. Yeah. I really think so. I think it's a very good idea.
Thank you. Before we conclude this conversation with Carlos, because we do have another 5-6 minutes, Carlos, I would like to take advantage of this little time and ask a little bit about your advice from your experience as a former foreign correspondent actively working in the US for Argentina media. What is your advice to the new generation of foreign journalists? May come from Argentina, may come from other countries. They want to work as foreign journalists to the US. What is the reflection of your experience that you can share as an advice today after such a long career?
Sure. Well, I think one of the most important things that I discovered is that, and I've seen this in my experience as a press freedom advocate. Mm-hmm. Journalists usually look at press freedom when they have a problem themselves, right? Mm-hmm. When they are victims of a threat or an attack, or and that's when wow, this is it touches on me. So I think it's important that journalists are much more aware mm-hmm. of the problem that colleagues are facing in closed societies, in places when populist politicians attack the press and and incarcerate journalists for speaking out, or when or countries where there's organized crime and drug traffickers kill a journalist who has been reporting on it. I think it's important to have this kind of awareness among the profession in terms of what, and I think that for for press freedom organizations around the world, it's also important to be, closer to the media and closer to journalists. I think there's a gap there, between many of these NGOs, especially those where there are lawyers and, there are not so many journalists, and, so I think it's important for NGOs to be much closer to the field. But for journalists, I think that it's the consciousness and awareness of what's going on around the world. It's very important, not only when something happens to you.
Yeah. When the problem is knocking your door, then you realize that the problem is reaching out to you.
Exactly. Yes.
Last question. I'm sure that, as any professional, you've been through a lot of success moments, a lot of disappointments. Do you recall a successful moment in your career and a moment of a failure or a disappointment? And what lesson each of these moments, the good and the bad moment, brought to you?
Well, I think that for me, in terms of success, I will say, I don't know, interviewing someone like Katharine Graham was something that really felt, after that, I felt really good. In my life as an advocate, the conviction of prosecution of someone who has attacked or killed a journalist was something that obviously, when I was feeling obviously rewarded, or at least feel like the work as an advocate was kind of at least fulfilling in a way. Especially in the years where I was at CPJ, probably was very very bad in terms of killings and imprisonments and attacks, with journalists killed by dozens in Colombia first, and then later in Mexico and in Brazil. So some of them being executed by drug killers and dismembered. So it was very rough. So to see someone get out of jail because of the work you put forward towards campaigning on their behalf, or the conviction of someone who was responsible of killing, that was kind of when I felt really fulfilled. In terms of of stories, I think I was shocked, and I was one of the things that during my time at CPJ that really shocked me was the killing of a friend who was a very well-known journalist and an author in Mexico. His name was Javier Valdez Cárdenas, who worked in Culiacán in Sinaloa, the Mexican state where Chapo, the famous drug lord Guzman, was from. And I had a very close relationship. He was a good friend. At CPJ, we had given him an award for his courageous work, thinking that this would help him add a layer of protection to him. And a few years after that, after reporting on very sensitive issues as he was used to, he was brutally murdered in the streets of Culiacán after he came out of the newsroom. He was shot many times and killed. And I have been trying to convince him to get out of the country shortly after he wrote the story that probably cost him his life. And I had everything in place to get him out of the country at that time. a few months before he was killed.
That's
and
so.
he didn't want to leave the country. His daughter just got married a few weeks before. His son was in his last year of high school, so he didn't want to leave. And I was telling him that it was convenient at that time to leave. He left the city of Culiacan for a few months. Came after that. I again told him that obviously he knew the field better than anyone else, but I think there was this time when Chapo Guzman was arrested, and the leading the cartel changed its structure. The leaders of the cartel were people that he didn't know as well as the traditional leaders of the cartel, and they didn't have a good read of what was going on at that time, and I think he felt that he could still remain there without risk, and this is so it was really shocking, and it was a very obviously terrible experience personally, because it was a good friend and someone I cared about, and someone that I was trying to help, and unfortunately was killed in these circumstances.
That's a really shocking story. Let's close this conversation with a message of hope from you, Carlos, but also I would like to ask for a message of hope from Frank Smith, who is also here, and Nancy Campbell, as a short message to our audience. What is the message of hope on this press freedom principle issue that our societies are facing, regardless of ideologies?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there is hope, honestly, and I'm an optimist. Despite the situation, the steep decline of press freedom that has been compounded by COVID-19, and which came, we didn't go through this, but I mean, COVID-19 imposed even more problems to journalists. Governments, more repressive, more arrests, more.
Has a negative impact.
But I think that despite that, you see in many parts of the world, dozens of examples of journalists and outlets that are doing an amazing work despite the challenges and despite the risks, that are doing great investigative work, independent work, shedding light into corruption stories, into the work of organized crime, political corruption, corporate corruption. So that's for me. It's great to see that, and to see that that is still flourishing in societies where are facing tremendous challenges for journalists to do this, and they are taking extraordinary risks to bring stories for the people to be informed about this and to become relevant, in countries where there are where the restrictions are passed. So I think that's very very hopeful to me.
It is.
Continue to see this. Yeah,
it is. Frank.
Well, I think there's a lot of great journalism going on out there by people that are really committed, and a lot of young people, and they have a lot of heart in many different countries. And I think there are efforts, as Carlos alluded to try and investigate those that have murdered journalists, and I'm involved in some of those. And that gives me hope, because I think there's an awareness that we can't go backward. Despite what's happening around the world, we have to keep going forward. And I'm an optimist, and I think I'm not alone. As Carlos said, he's an optimist too. And I think if you're a journalist, by definition, you have to be an optimist, right? And I think there are many people out there that are giving it all and still reporting despite what happened to Khashoggi and others. So I think that's the message of hope, Thanos.
Thank you, Frank. Nancy?
Mine's going to be fairly brief, but and start out a little bit trite when I say that it's always darkest before the dawn. I think we've seen an absolutely horrific situation just get worse because of all of the issues that you've spoken of, COVID and political issues. But the one thing that clings is the optimism and the solution that there are that many people or that many organizations that have a vested interest in trying to come up with some kind of protective format. And all I can say as far as encouragement goes is let's look into them. Let's try to bring together a forum and see if we can actually take this as an issue that is relevant worldwide and look for consensus in how to not just protect the journalist, but protect the society from all that occurs when journalism is muted.
Excellent. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Frank. But most importantly, thank you, Carlos, Lauria, for taking the time to be our special guest in this program today. It was a great pleasure to have you here, and we look forward to have more programs like this, and we look forward to collaborating even further with experts like you on this very important issue.
Thank you, Thanos. It was my pleasure. Thank you very much for the invitation, and it was a great surprise to see my friend Frank Smythe here. I haven't been in touch with him for some time, but it's a great pleasure. And thank you, Nancy. I think your contribution was very important too.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you all.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you very soon.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Thanos. Bye-bye.